Okay, all right. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone. If you'd like to, put on your video, that's wonderful. If you're doing something else and you're better with the video off, that's of course fine also. And this is a little bit of a last minute Tuesday night talk. We've been trying to have, interesting teachers and speakers from across the country. And we have a whole bunch of very interesting speakers. There's Ellen. Thank you, Ellen, for helping so much with all of the talks. And Ellen can confirm this. We'll be announcing soon some very interesting talks over the next month or so. Right, Ellen?
Yep, and suggestions are welcome.
Yes, that's a very good point also. Anyone here, if there's a specific speaker, welcome Zev. Okay, we've had Zev at a minute now. It's wonderful to see Zev. And okay, again, a continued complete refuah shlema, Zev. And if there's a suggestion for a speaker or a topic for us to find a speaker on, certainly would always accept input. So someone suggested, well, if you don't want scheduled, I can give a share. So I said, sure. And since we're, this is, I guess, Erev Tisha, not Tisha B'Av, Erev Thanksgiving. So we'll discuss the topic of, was turkey always kosher? I didn't entitle it, is turkey kosher? Turkey is kosher. Was turkey always kosher, or was it always agreed that it was kosher? This is a very popular topic. If you go online, you can find many shiurim on this topic. And we'll go through some of the basics. I'll share with you a little bit if I have any spin or anything to add. There is a sort of the classic article, at least in English halachic publications, is by someone named Dr. Ari Zivotofsky, who's a very, very interesting person. He's a PhD in something, but he researches all these very interesting halachic issues. Happens to be, it was for his son's passport that there was a Supreme Court case to be able to list Jerusalem, Israel on the passport. He's a really interesting character. So anyways, I think before Shabbos, I'll send out that complete, that article if you want to read it over Shabbos, the full version, the full treatment of this issue. Yes, Zev.
Rabbi, last week, he had his passport changed.
Yeah.
Now it says Jerusalem, Israel.
Yeah.
So we have to give our kavod tov to whoever was able to do that.
Yeah. So he's if we could ever get him as a speaker, I would love to. He would be a very interesting speaker. Anyways, all right, let us begin. So was turkey always kosher? I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. There are 2 pages of sources with much translation. The first page will be sort of general background, the issue of how do we determine which birds, which fowl are kosher, and then some sources specific to turkey. Okay, hold on one second, everyone. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. Was turkey always kosher? So we begin with a Mishnah. I apologize, it says 59a, that's Chulin, 59a. The Mishnah says as follows: Simane behema v'chaya, the signs to determine if a domesticated or wild land animal is kosher. Nemru min Torah, that is stated in the Torah. What are those? Of course we know, split hooves and chuzit skad. V'simane ha'of, but the signs to determine if a bird is kosher, lo nemru, were not stated in the Torah. I don't know if the psukim, but the Torah lists 24 birds, categories of birds. Some we think we know even today which birds it's referring to. Many we're not really sure. The Torah lists 24 birds that are not kosher, and all other birds are kosher. An important point is that the Torah's classification is not going to be the same as today's modern science classifications, and what science today would classify as one species and another species. In general, the Torah will have more broad categories. So, let's say Orave, if that's one of the 24. Is that one of the 24, Mike, or anyone else? Is the Orave listed as one of the 24 not kosher birds? I think so.
Yes, it is.
Yep. So that could include, which is generally translated as raven. There could be, tens of different raven species that, in a science textbook today would list as 10 different species, but they're all kinds of ravens, and they would all be included in the Torah's category of a raven, just as an example. Okay, but so the signs of the birds were not specified in the Torah. So if you are certain the identities of the 24 categories of not kosher birds, then you're fine. Also, assuming you know how to define how broadly or narrowly to define those categories, then you're fine. But even in the days of the Mishnah, they couldn't do that. They needed signs. They needed characteristics to be able to determine if birds are kosher, if a bird is kosher or not. There are, thousands, tens of thousands of kinds of birds, I'm sure. So the Mishnah says, Aval Amru Chachamim, but the sages said, the Chachamim developed character traits to be able to determine any bird if it is kosher or not. Now, these character traits, it seems clear, was not a tradition they had from Sinai. Maybe it's partially based on such a tradition, but somehow they felt they could figure out and determine the common character traits of kosher and not kosher birds. So what are those? So the Mishnah says, Kol of hadores, any bird, which this translation says claws. Sometimes it's translated as a bird of prey. All right, and any bird that attacks, tameh, is not kosher. So like an eagle is not kosher. A vulture is not kosher. However, the Mishnah says, but that's not the only rule to determine. Kol sheyeshlo etz b'yasera, a bird that has an extra digit, meaning like a thumb, like a digit that is opposite the other digits in its foot. Vizefek, and a bird that has a crop. Vikor kavano niklaf, and it has a gizzard that can be peeled, I guess, without pulling out other organs. If it has those three character traits, again, an opposable digit, or if someone has a better way to say that, a crop and a gizzard that can be peeled, then tahor, it is kosher. So it needs to be not an animal that attacks, an animal that is not dores. So that's has to do with the behavior of the bird. And it requires, just read it in that simple way, requires three character traits in terms of the anatomy of the bird to be kosher: an opposable digit, a crop, and a gizzard that peels. The Gemara has other potential signs, but we'll just focus for our purposes on the signs of the Mishnah. I have a funny story about a korkavan, about a gizzard. Normally, most people don't have funny stories about gizzards, but any questions or comments before we continue? This is the Mishnah.
Are the positive and negative signs the same or different? In other words, are there birds where we say, even if it, do we say that the birds that are dores, however you want to translate that, are a disjoint set from the ones that have the digit in the crop and the gizzard? Or do we say that either one of those ways is okay, or how you need both?
Very good. All of these things are subject to disputes. The way I recall, Rashi, there's machlokes in Rashi and the other Rishonim. Rashi holds that you need all four, and I believe many other Rishonim hold that really the primary character trait really is dores. And the three positive traits, if you have the three positive traits, somehow Chazal had determined if an animal has an extra digit, has a crop and a gizzard that peels, it is not a dores. That is a way to know that it's not a dores. So according to that, it would be sufficient to have these 3 anatomical traits. And that would then, you know for sure it's not do race, but I believe Rashi doesn't hold like that. We're going to get into some of these disputes.
I wanted to show you, I had gotten this video from the OU a few years ago.
Yeah,
Can you see it?
I can see the top of it.
Oh.
Who is it by? Is there an author or like some
Rabbi Chaim Loike,
Loike, yeah.
Loike,
Yeah.
who's the rabbinic coordinator with the OU Kashrus. And it's very interesting because it's kind of done tongue in cheek. And he basically goes through the whole things of what birds are kosher, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. He's also an expert on animals. I think he's also a very expert shochet. I don't know if that comes, but Chaim Loike, yeah. So my Korkovan story is as follows. And it sort of speaks to, there's some people that, they can be incredible Tamei Chachamim, everything it says in the books, but you also have to have some real life experience. So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik's greatest student, other than his own sons, was a great Gaon named Rav Baruch Ber Levovitz. He later became Rosh Yeshiva of his own yeshiva in Kamenetz. And a story told in yeshivas is that one time someone brought a chicken to Rav Baruch Ber to determine if the chicken was kosher or not, because back then you could buy a chicken, there could be some sort of internal wound. It's not like our chickens nowadays, everything has already been koshered, et cetera, and inspected. And the person, the man, the woman is showing the inside of the chicken to Rav Baruch Ber, and there's something that's bloody, whatever it is. And the person is saying, look at this. I mean, it never looks like this, whatever it is. And so Rav Baruch Ber clearly had never spent so much time looking inside of a real chicken. He had learned chulin backwards and forwards many times, but he had not spent much time looking at a real chicken. And Rav Baruch Ber said, well, can I ask you actually, like, what is that? What do you point, like, what part of the animal is it they're pointing at? So the person said, that's the korkovan. And Rav Baruch Ber started jumping up and down. The korkovan, the Heilige korkovan. I've learned so much about the korkovan, and now I've met the Heilige korkovan. That's the Heilige korkovan, the holy gizzard. Anyways, so that's the story about the gizzard. All right, continuing in our sources. The next source is Tosfos. So we're going to focus on the character trait of being a do race. What does that mean? So we have just a line and a bit from Tosfos. Hado race. Pirish Bakuntris. He's quoting Rashi. Rashi explains, what does do race mean? Not what you would probably expect. Rashi writes, Sha'oches bitzi pornav. It holds the prey, the food, by its claws. Umagbia min akarka, and lifts it up. Mashocha, what it eats. The way Rashi seems to present it has nothing to do with whether it kills the prey or not, but how it uses its claws when it eats. It grabs the food by its claws and picks it up and eats it.
Well, but think about all the birds that don't pick up their food. They just peck it right out of the ground with their beak.
Exactly. That's what it seems like he's saying. As opposed to birds that peck, though birds that peck are kosher, but birds that pick up with its claws are not kosher. Exactly. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. The Kosher Rabbeinu Tam, but Rabbeinu Tam found this very problematic. Rashi's grandson. We have to check this, Mike. I don't know if you know this or not. Daha afilu tarnagolas osa came. This is what it says. But even chickens do that. Maybe chickens sometimes do that. I also thought chickens peck on the ground. Maybe their chickens were a little bit different than ours. I don't know. But Rabbeinu Tam said that can't be because the tarnagolas, which means chicken, normally, a bird that we know is kosher, does that. So that can't be what dores means. Okay? Umafarish Rabbeinu Tam. So therefore, Rabbeinu Tam explained, dores, what does dores mean? Dores ve'ochel mechayim. It attacks and eats mechayim. It means while the prey is still alive. Ve'eno mamtin la ad shetamus. And it does not wait until the prey is dead. That is what dores means. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, dores also doesn't just mean a bird of prey, a bird that attacks other animals. It means specifically a bird that attacks and eats its prey while the prey is still alive.
Well, but
That's
we
sort of to
know
the
that
other extreme.
a bunch of the non-kosher birds, at least we think, are vultures and other scavengers who eat dead prey.
Right.
So Rabbeinu Tam's explanation seems difficult to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I hear. So I would just was going to say I don't have a source. And other Rishonim are somewhere in the middle. Other Rishonim say no. Bird of prey means either any bird that attacks at all, doesn't have to eat it while it's still alive. You know, if it kills other animals. So the point just is that there's sort of a range of opinions in the Rishonim what dores means, which is you know, perhaps the most critical term, and it was never really resolved. And already in the days of the Rishonim, there are many Rishonim, right, who say we kind of, there isn't a consensus about these signs. There was already confusion in the days of the Rishonim.
If the Torah is silent on the criteria
Correct.
for the distinction between kosher and non-kosher birds, on the basis of what reasons is the Mishnah citing these criteria as the definitive marks?
Right. The Gemara does not explain where they come from. The rabbis somehow determined this. It's clear if not in the Gemara and the Rishonim, this is not a tradition halacha Moshe Sinai. Maybe dores, there was a tradition of halakha that went back to Moshe, that it can't be a bird of prey, however we define that. But in terms of other things, you know, the crop and the gizzard, that some, I don't know. I maybe if I knew more about birds, I would understand the connection. The Gemara has other simanim. The Gemara says there's a difference if when the bird sits on a like a pole, a beam, and its claws wrap around it. So it says there's a difference. You know, does it spread its how it spreads its claws? The Gemara says is a siman.
Does it have 2 in back and 2 in front, or 3 in front and 1 in back? Right. If you watch most perching birds, is that way. If you go look at a hawk or something like that, that's a real bird of prey. They're 2 and 2.
Okay. So again, and they were sufficiently convinced that if you're a bird of prey, then your talents are going to be like this, and if you're not, then it won't. But again, it's already in the Mishnah. It's ancient, clearly, but we don't really know exactly how they determined it, or you know. Okay, one more very important Gemara. The Gemara says like this: Amar of Papa said, Tarnagola da'agma, which in modern Hebrew we would translate that as the chicken of the swamp. Actually reminds me, it's not a tuna company, chicken of the sea. So this is the chicken of the swamp. Asira is forbidden. That bird, maybe chicken's not a good translation here, but this bird, the Tarnagola da'agma, is asir, is forbidden, Rav Papa said. Tarnagolta da'agma, but the Tarnagolta, which is just the feminine, grammatically, shari is permitted. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have a species where the male is not kosher and the female is kosher. But there are 2 different species that, in terms of their names, one, for whatever reason, the species was known by a male grammatical form, and the other species was called by the same name, but in female form. But they're different species here. Everyone following me? Is that clear? And Rav Papa said the simanech, and the mnemonic to remember, which is forbidden, which is permitted, is Ammoni velo Ammonis, is the famous drasha that in the nation of Ammonim, so it's only forbidden, the males of the Ammonim or Moab are forbidden to marry to the Jewish people, but the females are not, like Ruth, right, was a female, she could marry in. So the female is permitted. So this species of birds that has the feminine name is the permitted one. The masculine name is forbidden. The feminine name is permitted. Okay. That's what Rav Papa said. Darish Meremar, but Meremar taught Tarnagolta de'agma asira. No, that is incorrect. Even the feminine is forbidden. Why? Chazyuha didarsava achla. Because they later saw that this Tarnagolta does indeed attack. Again, whatever doris means, meaning initially they didn't think it attacked. They thought it was not doris. And then later it was discovered that it was doris. There was a mistake. So Rashi comments on this Gemara. Everyone clear on this Gemara? You can see why this is obviously a very important Gemara. The Gemara itself is itself recording that, sometimes there were mistakes, an animal that they thought was kosher and they realized was not. Rashi writes, Chaziyah de darsa v'achla. Ra'uha chachamim shedoreset. The sages saw that it indeed attacks. And now Rashi writes, this is the famous Rashi. Umitoch she'ein anu b'kiyam behem. And since Rashi's writing the present, we in our day, we are not expert in these things. Nearly, it seems to me, de'of haba lefanenu, if a bird or fowl comes before us that we've never seen before. Yesh lomar shema yidros. We should be concerned that maybe indeed it is dores. Again, attacks, however we would define that. Dehahach tarnagolta da'agma, because this bird, hayumachazikin b'tahora, they assumed was tahor, was kosher. Ula'acher zman ra'ua shedoreset, and then later, after time, they saw that indeed it is dores and it is not kosher. Ve'ein of nechal lanu, a bird is not eaten by us. Ella b'mesoret, only if there's a tradition. The mesoret of shemasru lanu avotenu, only if there's a tradition on the bird that our ancestors passed down to us b'tahor, that is tahor. Ushelo masru lanu, but if we do not have a tradition, yesh lachash, we have to be concerned. U'b'mesoret yesh lanu lismach, but if there's a tradition, then you can rely on that, even though you didn't independently determine it doesn't attack. Kida Amar Lekaiman, as the Gemara will say later on, the Gemara has such an example where someone came, it wasn't a scholar, it was actually a bird hunter, and he brought a bird that they'd never seen before, and he said, I have a tradition that is a kosher species, and they accepted it. And Rashi, though, is saying that we now require that. We in his opinion, we should require a Masorah, because again, even already in Rashi's day, the Jewish people moved lands, they moved into other countries, new birds that they'd never seen before. They had forgotten what the original 24 birds in the Torah, clearly what all of them meant, referred to. And so we require a Masorah. And the point is, this is different than, let's say, for land animals, we know if it, at least in principle, the basic halacha, if it chooses cud and it has split hooves, it's kosher. But again, it goes back to by birds, the Torah does not give signs. So by birds, we require tradition, and eventually this became the accepted practice throughout the Jewish people. It is in the Shulchan Aruch. I can't tell you, when it became the universally accepted opinion, but certainly by the days of the Shulchan Aruch, it has been codified, and no one disagrees with this practice. Doesn't seem like it, at least. Okay. Any questions, comments? So this is the background of the laws of the kashrus of birds, fowl in general.
So
yes.
So obviously in the Middle East, they have their species of birds, but there are birds like in parts of the world where there's no equivalent, whether you go to Australia or you go to other places. So how would the Masorah apply to them?
Very good question. That's basically going to be the second half now of our shiur, because what you call Australia, everything's perspective. You think the world revolves around North America. At one point, North America was the exotic land. 500 years ago, the Europeans were saying, how would Masorah apply to the New World? So if that's okay if I present it that way, but so that's exactly what we're going to discuss, Jerry.
I had a quick question, Rabbi.
Sure.
So is one of the reasons why we don't eat the birds that come down and claw their prey because they're kind of like, is it something in their nature that like the Rabbanim don't want us to eat because they're kind of like predators or something?
That's certainly how some would interpret it. The Torah doesn't give reasons for why, keeping kosher, not kosher in general. But there certainly was a school of thought that there's certain properties to these animals spiritually, what they represent, whether it's birds or again, certain land animals. Again, there's certainly many people who wrote that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, let's move on to Turkey specifically. We're going to have 3 tshuvas from the 19th century. The first comes from Shlomo Kluger. Shlomo Kluger was one of the most prolific halachic authorities in the 19th century. And he wrote many, many books, and they were not all printed. His glosses appear in the standard Gemara nowadays. His glosses in Shulchan Aruch appear in the standard Shulchan Aruch. This is one of his collections of responsa, which is called Ha'elef Lecha Shlomo, which is probably a plain word somewhere in Tanakh, but Ha'elef means 1,000 because there are 1,000 responsa in this one collection. So that's where the name comes from.
It's a pasuk, I think it's your shiurim.
Shir Shirim, yes, I was going to say, it sounds like something in Shir Shirim. Yeah. One of his famous rulings was machine matzahs were coming out in his lifetime. He was the stringent opinion at the time. He came out against machine matzahs. We're going to see he's going to be the machmer here as well. So he writes as follows: Al das, regarding the matter, she'ela so, your question, benidon ha'ofos, with the issue of birds, habayim min America, that come from America, most prominently Turkey. Now, part of an issue here was, there was great confusion in the in general knowledge in the 16th, 17th, 18th, we'll see even into the 19th century, of where Turkey came from. Many people thought it came from India, and in many languages, the word for Turkey is related to India. Like in Hebrew, it's called Tarnagol Hodu. Not everyone realized that it came from America, but apparently Shlomo Kluger did, or it's about whatever species that come from America. Masha kasafta, this that you write, or Masha kasaf hamatirim, this that the lenient authorities that say it's permitted write. Shahayaksav me America, that they have a letter or something written from America. Sheyesh lahem misoret, that they have a tradition that Turkey is kosher. This is very interesting. Hevel yifsa, they are speaking vanity, nothingness. Why? How so? Hine Medinas America nisyashiv b'Yisrael ze erech meya shanim. There have only been Jews in America for about 100 years, which is true. I think the first Jews came in the 1700s. Umi kodem lo haya sham yishuv Yisrael. Before then, there was no Jewish community in America. Uminayin lahem mesoret. Where do they have a tradition from? Va'od zos, and furthermore, this gives you a glimpse into how the Jewish community, rabbinic elite, saw America. Yadua, it is known. Ki az ba'u l'sham, because at that time, who went there? Who went to America in the 18th century? Rak kol mare nefesh. Not sure exactly what it means, but that means like the depressed. V'chol asher lo nosha, people in debt, who are running away from debt. The kale hadat, Ruban, and Kale Hadat means the uneducated. Okay, I don't know whether that's true or not. They definitely weren't very religious and learned in Torah in the 18th century in America, I don't think. That's at least the majority of them, he says. He I guess, leaves open the possibility there were some learned people there. Ve'ein kadai lismo chaleim. You cannot rely on them. Who are you relying on? So you're saying there's a tradition, from 100 years ago. There were no learned, in terms of Jewish and Torah tradition people in America. So it's a joke. How can there be a tradition that the turkey is kosher? We'll just skip the last line. Umi shelo yishma lidvarenu, anyone who does not listen to our words, atid litain etadin, will in the future have to face judgment. So Shlomo Kluger presents really what is the logical opinion a priori, that if we require birds to have a tradition, the turkey was a bird that was found, clearly could not have had a tradition. So you can't eat it. You just 1 + 1 = 2. There's what else is there to discuss? That is the opinion of Rosh Kluger.
Rabbi, does a Masorah refer specifically to a community of the learned? Suppose, as was the case in America, where there were no learned, but there was what we would call a tradition amongst the unlearned.
Yeah.
Would that count as a Masorah or would that not count?
No, it would not. In principle, we require that that we can attribute the tradition at least at some point to a learned, worthy authority. Now, sometimes we might say, listen, if all of Brookline has a tradition and we don't know exactly where it came from, probably it came, we know the previous generation had learned authorities. So we can rely on presumably those learned authorities at least okayed it. It couldn't have gone to such a universal practice if it didn't have some, if the learned authorities didn't acquiesce to it. But if you knew that there's a community that basically were always unlearned, they never had anyone learned, then that would not count.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Are you Rabbi?
Sure. Yes, I don't see who's talking, but yes. Just let me know who's talking.
Ari, you want to go? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just on that, Rabbi, what you said makes sense, but it in general, but in this case, based on Rashi's concern is the concern of Marimar, which is not a concern really which really has nothing to do with whether somebody's learned or not. It really has to do with whether people are observant of the animals, right? Whether people have watched the animals. So it shouldn't matter that the community is uneducated, as long as they are people who have significant exposure to the animals. And if you've witnessed the animals for 100 years and you've never seen them eat meat, bidores, then assuming you know what that means, but then that should be enough.
Okay, good point. And I'm going to partially agree with you. There will be those who will say something like that. The only thing I would add is that even though you're right, so again, you can't totally divorce it from halachic knowledge, because like you're saying, well, what does dores mean? But even if it would be something which is totally not halachic, I think we would still say we need people that appreciate the gravity of the issue. Like obviously if you had people who didn't keep kosher, right? So then we couldn't rely on their sort of ascertainment that it's not dores, because they don't appreciate the issues that are at stake. So I think we would still require some you're right, maybe it doesn't have to be the greatest Talmud Chacham, but some sort of respect for their Torah opinion, so to speak. If you, we will come to suggest something. Others did suggest something like what you're saying.
Okay,
I do have a question, Rabbi.
Sure, Deborah.
This Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, I'm assuming he's an Ashkenaz rabbi?
Yes, yeah.
Because it was from the early 18th century, a small but significant and observant Sephardi community of Spanish and Portuguese immigrants in New York City. And I don't think you could have considered them uneducated if you look into the history of that community.
That could be. You're right. I don't know, Deborah. I can't.
You can read Jonathan Sarna's American Judaism talks a lot about sort of these early communities. And I think it's true that, like, by and large, they were unlearned, but usually the first person that a community would hire was a shochet. It wasn't a rabbi, it wasn't a chazan, it was usually a shochet. So presumably these shochetim that they're bringing over from the old country
knew what animals.
Had some experience with this.
Yeah.
Right. We do know that there weren't any rabbis in the New World until I think 1828.
That's not true.
Right?
That's only true in North America, perhaps.
North America.
Right. In the Caribbean and in South America, there were old communities with learned rabbis. First one I think came from Amsterdam in the early, in this middle of the 1600s.
There's also evidence that there were Jewish communities down in Florida in St. Augustine where they found Hebrew writing in a cemetery that was from maybe 1,000 from the year 1000. And then in New Mexico, there's also evidence of Jewish communities which might have stemmed from the 10 lost tribes somehow making their way to the New World way before.
That I can't speak of that, but okay, there's definitely a lot of interesting history. Coming after Shlomo Kluger. So Shlomo Kluger said you can't eat the turkey. Now, you should not think, though, that in the 1800s, wherever he was living, he lived in Galicia, in Lithuania, in Poland, in Russia.
He was in
Yeah,
Galicia.
they all ate. Everyone was eating turkey. Again, what Jews probably started eating turkey basically as soon as anyone else started eating turkey in their, respective countries. Whenever turkey reached their countries, and Rosh Hashanah is a very good point. But the question basically always is at some point someone woke up and said, "Wait a second, how do we all eat turkey?" The Shulchan Aruch says you need a tradition. Obviously, initially there wasn't a tradition specifically to turkey. So how do we do it? So there were different suggestions, and we'll see one or two inside. So some suggested similar to what Ari said, and that was, when did Rashi and the Shulchan Aruch require a tradition? When there's like a tradesperson passing through, and they come and they bring a cage, and there's a bird there. You've never seen that bird. You don't know anything about that bird. So you can't eat it if there wasn't a tradition in your town that kind of bird is kosher. But if you bring a bird, they give a year's time, and over a year's time you see it's this docile animal that is not dores, then that's good enough proof, and you don't need if over such a long period of time, then you no longer need a tradition. That was one suggestion, but it wasn't really, fully accepted, certainly by everyone. Again, in the original sources, Rashi, the Shulchan Aruch just says you need a tradition. Another suggestion, which was not proposed specifically for turkeys, we'll see in the second source. This is a tshuva from the Avnei Nezer of Avram Bornstein, who's also known as the Sachachavar Rebbe. He married the daughter of the Kutzker Rebbe, and he became his own Rebbe, his own Hasidic dynasty. And he's a Hasidic Rebbe who was recognized as a great halachic genius authority also. And he has a tshuva as follows. B'davar, regarding the matter, ha'avazim, geese, right? Isn't avazim geese, I think?
Yes.
Asher huvu lavorsha, that were brought to Warsaw, mi medinot harechokim berusia, from some far-off land in Russia, ubahem shinuyam me'avazim shalanu, and they're geese, but there's some significant differences between the geese that we're used to. Vehem avazim me'avazim shonim. I think that's probably play on some pasuk also. They're geese, different kinds of geese. How is so? Yesh mehem mechulakim mishalanu. They're different than ours. B'mashet savaram aruch mishalanu. It's a significantly longer neck. V'yesh mehem od sheyesham gav shushit barosham. I'm not sure what that means. Some kind of crown, or maybe something underneath the chin, some sort of protrusion. V'hu shinui gadol, and it's a very significant difference. They look different. V'yesh mehem od shachartumam shachor ke'im bar avza. They have a black nose, like a bar avza. Again, I'm not sure what that is. So, but they're different. So it's a goose, but it looks very different. So this gets into the issue of, where do we draw the line? If you have a tradition that geese are kosher, what if there's a new kind of goose that is very different? Do we say it's basically the same species and it's included in your tradition, or at what point is it so different that halacha would view it as a different species, and therefore you can't eat it without a tradition? So part of this tshuva discusses that. How significant of the differences do they need to be? But skipping to this next little paragraph. Ach kasav kvod toraso, but the questioner, you also write, Ode, ki bekfarim, in the villages where they come from. Lochen avazim elu laharviam im avazot shalanu. They breed their geese with the kind of geese that we are used to. V'hine yesh lahavi raya mizeh shetorim. This can be sufficient proof that they are kosher. Mishas B'chos from Gemara B'choros, Meidusa Shub and Levi, who said, La'olam ein mitaberet lo tmea min hatahor, lo tahor min tmea, that a kosher and not kosher animal cannot breed and produce offspring. That is the rule of this Reshua ben Levi. So the Avnei Nezer suggested that if a bird can be bred and have a child with a kosher bird, then you know for sure it is kosher. And apparently you can breed turkeys with chickens, other known kosher birds. Apparently you can. This argument, though, was also not fully accepted, maybe even, mostly not accepted. And others contended, for good reason, that this rule that you can't breed a kosher, not kosher animal, that was originally seen in the context of like land animals, meaning like, a pig and a cow. But for birds, that is not necessarily so. So again, some wanted to make such an argument that would help us for turkeys, but again, it was not really, fully accepted. So we come to what I believe is the true and correct reason why turkey is kosher. I suggest, at least. There's a similar tshuva from the Netziv, from Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. And it would seem, I somehow stumbled across this, that this response of the Netziv is the origin of the response to what we just read, to the Avnei Nezer. The same person asked the same question to both of these great Gedolim. You'll see. You tell me if you disagree. The Netziv writes, Michtav Mailas Kvot Raser Nero Yair. Again, these are like sort of honorary descriptions, honorifics. Your letter, Higia Shariti Mirachok, your letter reached me from afar. Lishol Daiti Akala, to ask my humble opinion, Bedavar, regarding what matter? Avazos Gedolim Umushunim Meavazos Hamitzios Beinenu, the geese that are different than our geese. Ba'orech Savaram, with the length of their necks. Uvegav Shushis Sha'ala Chartum, and again, I'm not sure, some sort of protrusion, something hanging, dangling from their noses. So, I mean, it seems to be the same geese, like the long-necked, it uses the same word even, this Gav Shushis. Here, this was where that word. So it seems the person originally asked this question to the Netziv. And the Netziv writes, Ibra. So the Netziv basically says, I would consider this a different species, and therefore really should require a tradition, and therefore really it should be forbidden at first blush. Ibra, however, kol zeh im hayaba lefanai merosh. That is what I would have said if this matter came to me from the very beginning. Aval achar shekvar nagu laochlam. Since people have already begun eating them. Umestama gam az hayal pi horas chacham. He says, and we can assume perhaps that originally it was based on the ruling of some chacham. Shenir lo shumin avaz hatahor, that he felt it should be included in the general category of geese that are kosher. And therefore it became accepted to be kosher. Ein lanu laosram. We cannot forbid them. Lahotzi laz ala vosenu, and to besmirch our ancestors. Sha'achlu of tamei chas v'shalom, and to declare they were all eating not kosher. And then he says, V'teidan, you should know. Shaheter ha'of indik, which apparently means turkey. You can take my word for it, but that's apparently what, because you can see, you know, that the accepted permission to eat turkey, shanu ochlim, that we eat, hayu harbe ma'arim aleim. There are many who questioned it. Bisha shehevim me India, when they brought it from India. So again, because again, many people thought turkeys came from India. V'lo haya masoras al kashrusam, and there was no tradition. V'gam od hayom, and even today, yesh machmirim uporsha mehem. There are those who are strict and don't eat it, and even today there are limited individuals that don't eat turkey as a stringency. Mikomakum, nevertheless, kvar nagu laheter. The practice is to allow it. The ain potzapeh, and no one, opens their mouth, to complain or to say it's wrong. And that is because it's already been accepted to be permitted. The ain raya from, and we certainly have no proof that they are forbidden. So what is the Nesiv saying? So then you ask, well, so ways like, why is it permitted? The way I understand the Nesiv is that he's saying, and what I would argue is that, again, the same thing as with turkey. If we would have realized the facts from the very beginning, and they would have asked the question from the very beginning, and before anyone started eating them, they would have asked the rabbis, and they would have looked up in the Shulchan Aruch. It's very likely they would have said, we have no tradition. So the Ashkenazi minhag is to not eat a bird without a tradition, so we don't eat it. But that's not what happened. And however, whether there was just confusion or people didn't know, whatever the reason is, everyone started eating it. And again, it does fulfill all of the requirements of the Mishnah in terms of the crop and gizzard and digit, and it doesn't seem to be that it's doreis, a bird of prey. So, sort of Rashi's stringency was sort of, it was a minhag, and it was a minhag accepted to be sort of the like insurance policy that we don't make a mistake. But it was a minhag that was accepted. And so, that minhag does not require us to stop doing what all Jews have been doing for hundreds of years. Am I saying this clearly enough? If it would be a real halacha, if it would have been from the Gemara and someone woke up and said, oh my gosh, this is really wrong on a Torah level, or there's an official rabbinic enactment, it would be difficult. I don't know, but you would have to either find a true halachic reasoning to allow it, or you couldn't just let it pass. But we can assume that this minhag that was accepted to be an insurance policy a priori. It was never meant to be something to after the fact, hundreds of years later, change basic universal practice that everyone eats turkey. So basically what I'm saying is what I think the Nesiv is saying, there really isn't a good answer. There really isn't a good answer. And if we would have realized in the beginning, we would have probably done things differently. But it's a minhag. And so somehow this snuck through, and the minhag doesn't require us to stop doing what, and indirectly cast aspersions on previous generations. Even if, the minhag is not important enough to do that either. So at least that is my suggestion. That's my small spin on this larger discussion. But that's all I have to share. But if anyone has any questions or want to comment, please feel free to do so. Yes, Ari.
So what the Nesiv says, at least the way you framed it, I think can't possibly be correct. Because,
yeah. Okay.
But based on what we already just learned in the Talmud, right, which is that Rav Papa said that this animal, that this bird is kosher, and then later Marimar was the generation after Rav Papa. Later Marimar said it's not kosher. So Marimar did exactly what the Nesiv says you should do.
But they're very good, Ari. But that was because Marimar said, right, they saw it was doreis.
Right. So what I'm saying is the way you framed it can't be correct unless you modify it to say that once you have a tradition, you can assume by chazaka that it's okay. But if you ever observe it to be doreis later, then you have to change. You would have to.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, no, I agree to that. Yeah, meaning if we found an indication, an objective indication that really it's not kosher, then we would have to stop eating it. But here, all indications are that it is kosher. It's just that we don't have the Masorah to fulfill Rashi's stringency. So Rashi's stringency doesn't require us to stop eating it.
Okay. Also, by the way, just the history about India and Turkey, right, is that when the explorers were going They were searching
Right.
for India, right? So they
Right.
I misidentified what we now call the West Indies as the East Indies. So
Yeah.
if they came from there, that I think that's why it was originally identified as India. And the reason why it's sometimes referred to as Turkey is that the Ottoman Empire was controlled a lot of the trade, and so in some places, Turkey came to certain places through Ottoman traders. So that's why they refer to it as the Turkish bird. And in some places they thought it came directly from India, which is why they called it the Indian bird.
Also, there was even among the biologists, the most likely wild source for the domesticated chicken is a bird called a guinea fowl. And there was some thought early on that the turkey was a variety of guinea fowl, although modern biology shows that that's not correct. But I mean, even among early scientists in Europe, that wasn't so obvious at the time.
The guinea fowl is from Indonesia, I believe.
Well, guinea fowls come in, there are a number of species in different places, but and the chicken one probably didn't. But
Jews have been eating chicken for a very long time.
although even that, you had that dispute in Israel a couple of years ago. Only this kind of chicken is kosher. Not every other kind of chicken is kosher.
Yeah, I don't even
And that
remember
one
that.
isn't.
Yeah.
And,
I
Rabbi,
remember the details. Those things always get resolved that, yeah, actually everything is kosher.
I came in a little bit late, Rabbi. Can you explain what Doris means again?
There are different opinions, but the simplest meaning is that it attacks, a bird that attacks
Oh,
others.
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I have a question, Rabbi.
sure.
I thought that this whole turkey issue was a shiloh that was sent from early settlers in America to the European rabbis.
No, I don't think, I mean, I'm not
Some said
certain, but
yes,
I don't
some said
think
no.
so. No, I don't think so. Not
Okay.
that I know of. Not that I
Okay.
know of.
Because Ellen will know these people. There was a family on Winchester Street, the Lapidus family, and they have a tradition. They don't eat turkey going back, many generations to whatever Rav, I don't remember the name, Paskin, that it wasn't the kosher bird.
So you'll see, now I'm definitely gonna send it out. First, so Lapidus or in Lapidus is a rabbinic, I don't know this person you're referring to, but that's a rabbinic family name. There was a Alexander Lapidus, there's a street in Yerushalayim that has his name on. Anyways, yeah, I actually saw that in this article. I'll for sure include this article by Dr. Ari Zivotofsky. He just sort of references there are like a few families that have traditions even nowadays not to eat turkey, and he actually mentions that family. So that's very interesting that one of them used to live here. Yeah.
Would birds like ostriches or emus be problematic like giraffes, where you wouldn't know how to shech them properly, even if it turns out that they potentially were kosher?
I honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not
and
sure.
that's not true of giraffes either.
That's the
not
issue.
sure.
Yeah, I've heard that also.
But ostriches, we tend to think of as being one of the birds that was explicitly excluded.
Right.
Emus, of course, a different story because they're not an old world bird.
Yeah. Okay, I think with that, okay, last question or comment. Yeah.
I mean, all this is only a question for a bird that does have a peelable gizzard and a crop and a
Correct.
and a third leg that points toe that points the other way, right? So many birds don't satisfy those conditions, so we can be sure about that.
Correct. Okay, all right. It was great seeing everyone. If I don't see you over the next couple of days, happy Thanksgiving.